Hello.
Can you hear us now?
Right.
Sorry about that.
Right. I was talking, no one could hear us. It wasn't your
We were just talking about how if there were issues with the webinar tech, so please let us know.
Yes. So the first one is to make sure you turn the microphone on. I'll start again. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Andrew Apostola. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Portable, and also involved in this research project that we're going to talk to you today. We've got Joe Shigutano as well, who's our design director at Portable, who led a lot of this research as well. And in the background, we've got Kate here, who is helping produce and put on this event. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen that there's a right-hand corner, a Q&A session. So feel free to ask questions as they come up, and Kate will send them across our way to answer. We'll answer them if we can. I'm happy to take questions at the end too. But so this is the first time we're running a webinar with this style. So as Joe said, if you've got any feedback around the content, but also the way we run this, it'll be really great to share that so we can make future ones a little bit better. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, culture. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm going to start by just running through a background of Portable. I think that many of you who are here who've seen our work before and understand the work that we do, but there's a few present that haven't, and I think we'll take the opportunity to explain that to folks. So we're a design innovation company, been around for 15 years, coming up next, I think, April. And we're made up of a mixture of designers, researchers, and technologists. It's about 15 or 16 people in our design team. And we have a design thinking approach and toolkit that we use to solving problems. We take the human-centered design approach as well to putting users in the center. A big part of our work is in this sort of research development area. We will go out, and part of our mission is to go out and seek and find areas of policy failure and social need, and try and use technology and design to bridge that gap. Often, and this sort of came out from the fact that often we're out there in the industry seeing a whole bunch of work being done, but identifying gaps as we go and wishing that we could have an impact, and spend a lot of time wishing that we could have that impact. And over the past 5 years, we've really shifted into a space where we can actually make a change. So you'll see in the background, if you're looking at the Portal website or you're browsing to find out more while I'm talking about it, you'll see a section with a whole bunch of reports in there, and they follow the exact same process, research process, which I'm about to describe as well. So there's Design for Justice, which is exploring how we as designers can design better outcomes for people working in the justice sector. There's the Future of Deaf and Aging, which is looking at aged care, but also the deaf industry. There's Redesigning Work, and also our first report into hacking the bureaucracy, so how to make change and innovation in organisations. But each of these follow, I guess, the same sort of methodology and process within the business. Each project will run typically like more than a year. Sometimes it's 1 to 2 years in nature. We'll identify an area from a partner or from just a general feeling from our research of need, and then we'll say, great, let's go out. So in the area of education, there's also a bunch of people within the organisation that had an interest within education. Then we'll go out, once we've identified that, we will reach out across the sector. We'll reach out to networks, and I think a few of you here today are part of that process, and we'll engage people in a 2-hour session, usually over a dinner, to try and find insights. About 16 to 20 people, where we extract as much as we can, and those dinners include people from government, people from industry, researchers, designers. We try and bring a very broad mix. From there, we use those individuals to help us make connections into the area of interest we're looking at. So we'll go out and we'll do interviews, workshops, co-design sessions, more traditional like surveying, to get as much information as we can, desktop research. And we try and guide the research in a way where we can provide, I guess, an area where we think we can add the most value. There's a lot of people that write reports and submissions and do similar work to us, but we we try and hone it in. And I should also say the work that we do is it's unfunded. We don't have a paymaster or someone we're reporting back to. This report isn't going to land on anyone else's desk. We self-initiate, so we feel like we can say some things that others wouldn't say. What we do say to individuals and what to do with this work is we hope that you can take it and share it with a colleague, spark a conversation, initiate change, and and help build a community. So that's the context by which we come to you, and hopefully running through design for education without screwing it up will kind of give you a bit more context and reflect some of that. So I'm going to throw to Joe now, who will run us through the report itself, and I'll chime in as we go.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Our interest in education, I think, has been around for a while. We had a couple of early clients in the education space, and our interest sort of grew from there. And it's obviously a huge space, which we'll sort of talk about, a learning of, it's just how broad and deep this space is. But one of the first sort of forays we made into this sort of proactive work in education was one of our designers, Kate Fale, who's currently in the UK, held a portable talk, which was a public event where we invited people in, and she shared her own school experience, and as a designer also shared a question that was sort of intriguing her, which is, what is the user experience of schools? As designers, we often think around user experience. So when we're designing a digital product or a service, we think about what is the journey and the experience of that user throughout that product, and also the broader context that they live in and that they experience that product in. And so we do research and we talk to people in order to understand what that context is, and we design products and services in order to fit within that context, ensuring that they're meeting people's needs. And so this question of what is the user experience of schools was a good provocative question. And if you're keen to see that talk, it's you can find it on our website. It's called Unlearning School. After that talk, we also held a bit of a workshop with the audience where we asked them to share with us examples of things that they found difficult during their education and things that they hope for the future of education. And that was our initial kind of piece of just understanding what some of the sort of subjects and themes might arise from our work. So from there, we held a dinner, as Andrew mentioned, or a number of dinners actually, one in Melbourne, one in Sydney, and we brought together experts from around the education system to share their knowledge. And we spoke about issues like the support for kids transitioning to schools, the role, the changing role of the teacher, measurement and evaluation of students and assessment, and of course about technology and how that's being implemented in schools and to varying degrees of success. And we also spoke to a number of people in some interviews. We spoke to primary school teachers, to founders of startups in education space. There was a data scientist working at the intersection of education and health, to Social Ventures Australia, to founders of a public school in the US, a peer-to-peer learning platform, the CEO of an alternative education provider, and a former principal and now policy advisor at DOE, the Department of Education. And so it's really for us about going as wide as possible and exploring as much of the current landscape as we can in order to get a sense of what the emerging themes are and where things could be heading. And so what did we learn from that? Well, we learned a lot of things. And one of the first things we learned that this was a huge area to begin exploring. And as often happens when we're exploring one of these areas, there's an initial sort of feeling of overwhelm as you near the edge of a cliff that you're about to dive off. And this felt like a big one, not only because there's a lot happening in this space already, which we'll talk about, but also because this sense of responsibility for approaching this with a degree of care. And so areas we explored, as mentioned, was technology, curriculum, the sort of trend of more student empowerment and autonomy given to young people. We looked at classrooms themselves and how those are shifting, and the way young people are being measured and assessed in school, just to name a few. And what we discovered was there's already a tremendous amount of innovative thinking already happening in education. So we often enter in these spaces looking to get inspired about what change we could make, and to discover that there was already so much exciting innovation happening made us sort of take a bit of a step back. But what it also meant was that because there is all this energy around transforming education, I think many people feel like the old institution of education is shifting and changing, and so that transformation is happening. It's the opportunity for many people, organisations, agencies like ourselves and others, to be going into education from the outside in and doing work to make an impact in that space. And that's really exciting, and we're excited by that. But it's also coming with that is a huge responsibility to not screw it up. And so, like, it's a cliche that the children are our future, but as people with a potential influence in how those young people experience some of those formative years of their lives, we have a sense of the responsibility that we have as change makers to think about how the future is going to be shaped by the decisions that we're making today. And not only do we think about young people when we're doing this, but we also think about the role that teachers play too. So as mentioned, our approach is human-centered design, which places human needs and human needs and motivations, I guess, in a higher priority to other targets, which often you find in other kind of approaches. But the humans involved in that when we say human-centered design, it's not just about the end user, although we place them in the center. It's also about the people helping deliver or implement whatever solution we're designing. So teachers play a crucial role in this, and so I guess that was one of the big learnings we had, is like teachers need to be considered in whatever solution we're designing. So after our initial round of research, a team of designers and researchers, we gathered back here at Portable, and we do what we do, which is to get everything up on the wall and start looking for themes and understanding where opportunities might be. And the team raised some real concerns about what we were learning. So typically in these sorts of projects, design projects, we get excited and we want to start pushing things towards a solution when opportunities arise. But I think there was a hesitancy from the team to do that prematurely because everything they were hearing from teachers and subject matter experts was, even though that there was this adamancy that transformation is needed and is already happening, at the same time there was a lot of concern about cowboys coming in and disrupting education the same way they might disrupt commercial markets. So people who are going into, in the startup space or going into other sort of commercial markets, and disruption being this sort of big theme that is, shifting the way technology and the way communication and connection happens and the way commerce happens, bringing that in mind to the educational space is potentially quite risky. And so with that in mind, we asked ourselves, how might we possibly design for change in this context, recognizing that there are huge opportunities for change and really exciting things to happen within education, but also maintain our responsibility of care and respect for the people that are already doing good work, both those doing the academic research to point to the future of what education might look like, but also those at the coalface on the ground, the teachers and students already doing the work to change things. So in that synthesis session of all our research, we, rather than come up with here are the trends we're seeing and here is the change we want to make, we thought it better to come up with some guiding lights for us to ensure that as we continue our work in this space, that we're doing it responsibly. And we're sharing that with you today. So the report that's up on the screen, that's available for download, is that guide, and we're calling it Design for Education Without Screwing It Up. So we came up with these 6 principles, these guiding principles, of what we call non-toxic transformation. So what is toxic transformation? So we've defined it as when transformation is short-sighted, biased towards a particular solution, or driven only by institutional needs. When transformation is either one of those things, we call it toxic because it leads to incomplete or inconsistent implementation of whatever solution is being implemented. poor adoption by the users, and potentially negative side effects. Often because there is a desire to make change and not a deep understanding of what the context is. Often they become band-aid solutions that end up creating more problems and don't actually address systemic ones. And we wanted to avoid that. We've seen it happen before in a variety of organizations. And I think the sense of responsibility people felt, I think many of the team had friends who were teachers and so had this sort of personal connection and empathy for that context, and gave us even more sort of motivation to ensure that we were doing it respectfully.
I think there's also, just to add, like, I've got, as we go, I've captured a few of the live quotes that we've through the research as well, which we anonymise for the purposes of getting real insights. But one is like, a lot of people are making money out of the after-school tutoring market. If you get to Oxford or Cambridge, you're not getting there on an ATAR. We should have the same approach. Australian schools would be better, be much better by doing less. Like there's a lot of moments or sentiments where people feel like that the education system has been asked of a lot consistently, and a place for change, when the reality is change should be sort of a much more measured approach, which came through the research.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk through these 6 principles, and then we're going to talk a bit about a project that we're currently working on for one of our clients, and how that sort of plays into practice. So to begin with, our first principle is be intent on growing, not disrupting. So this idea that there is already a lot of innovation happening within education, and that's coming in and pretending like all of that is broken or needs to change, is ignoring some of the really great work and considered work that's happening by people with a lot of expertise in that context. And it's happening in small ways every day around the country. Teachers are already experimenting, they're hacking, they're iterating, they're finding what works because they have to, often because the system that they're working within has failed them, and they need to find ways to make it work for the small human beings that are in front of them. And so we heard this a lot from teachers, that they were concerned, which we speak to one of our later principles, about their creativity and their flexibility to do that work becoming damaged by whatever top-down solution is implemented. Funnily enough, during this research, during our discussions in Victoria, a mobile phone ban was instituted by the Minister for Education in all schools in Victoria. And this was kind of emblematic of this kind of approach. I think it was well intentioned. I think most teachers would agree, and in the ones we spoke to definitely agreed, that devices in the classroom have become a problem and a challenge for the learning that's taking place. But the solution, the top-down solutions that come in with a blanket ban across them all without a great deal of consultation or even co-designing what that solution might look like, it ran counter to a lot of the ways that teachers had been building trust, a sense of empowerment, and using these opportunities to learn with the young people that they were teaching. And so they then felt on the receiving end of something that they didn't necessarily feel was in the best interest of growing the awareness of young people's consciousness around how technology should be healthily engaged with, rather than sort of put aside as a problem. Like, the fact of the matter is, technology is not going away. It's part of our everyday life. And so we need to find healthier ways of working with it. And I think that that experience for teachers kind of highlighted for us what we don't want to do, which is come in, whether it's policy or whether it's anything, a service experience, or it's a tech solution, to come in with a top-down approach and attempt to disrupt what's already happening without much consideration. And so we want to rethink disruption that's coming from the inside out, and think of innovation as starting in the classroom, and the role of those outside of the school, like us, is to see that positive change is already happening, and to work with practitioners in growing, scaling, and sustaining those changes already. And one of our approaches to doing that is co-design, which we'll touch on a bit more later. Our second principle is to give life to great unborn ideas of educators. So I think one of the most common themes we heard from talking to teachers, and any of you who are teachers or have friends who are teachers will know that teachers are incredibly time poor. So as much as they would love to be spending time improving the systems that they work within at different scales, I think the reality is they find most of their time spent just trying to keep their head above water and trying to keep their classrooms and putting the learning at front and center of what they're doing. And you know, the school day doesn't end at 3:30 p.m. for a teacher either, and they don't, you know, get all the pushy school holidays that you might imagine. A lot of that time is spent planning, preparing, and marking reports. And so I think the opportunity that exists there is, whilst there is a lot of energy and ideas of teachers of how things might be improved, it's really the opportunity we have is to harness that and to be a capable set of hands who can come in as designers, researchers, and technologists and help them prototype some of these ideas. And the way we do that is having a mentality that is safe to fail. And that's all what prototyping is all about. It's an experiment. We want to test something. We want to learn from the way it's being used. And we have permission to do that. And we like to give the people we co-design with permission to do that as well, because that's where the learning really happens. And so examples around the world of this, so IDEO has a program they call School Retool, which allows teachers around the US to create their own hacks and their own experiments to rethink the way their classroom runs. And it's just an example of some of the work that's already happening in the kind of space we love to play into. So I think having this mentality of thinking of partnering with educators rather than assuming we know what's best and we're going to be able to implement solutions because we're very clever. It's about saying, no, we have a methodology and an approach that can actually help bring some of these ideas to life once we've understood the problems.
I've got a couple of quotes to chime in again from diving in this area from the research that we picked up directly from people who went. One was around, I went to school with a lot of dreams and ideas, but I did not see that reflected back to me. Allow me to be the kind of teacher I was trained to be and want to be. And then from a different perspective, these new teachers are being set up to fail because as a passionate educator, I do not have the time to mentor them. There's definitely a lot of feeling and from the teachers themselves about the way in which their time is being used and used poorly as well. And one of the other interesting insights I have here as well is reimagine the schedule, how you actually spend time in the day to create change. And there's lots of discussions that aren't in this report, but picking up and reflecting on it that really shape ways that change can be possible without having to completely disrupt or bring in a new piece of technology or a new process.
Our third principle is a school is not an island. So one thing we learned is that the idea of school being a silo that is where the learning happens is outdated, and in fact was never really the way things worked anyway. But there's much more recognition and consciousness now that the boundaries of where school ends and life begins and the community begins is much more porous than people assumed previously. And so when we're designing for a school, we're designing for education, we need to think of that broader context. And similarly, when we're designing a digital product or an app, we want to understand who those users are and what the context they're coming to that app is so we can meet them where they're at. If we're designing something that sits within a school environment, or within the school experience or around the school experience, we need to think about those young people's and the parents and the teachers' mornings and their evenings, their weeks, their years, and what sort of context they're sitting in, not only time-based but geographically as well. And understanding that there is so much opportunity when those barriers are broken down of the walls of the classroom or the walls of the school that not only can students and teachers move out into the community, but the community can come into the school. And so some of the approaches we take as designers is the service design approach, where we're not only designing the experience, but we're thinking about the back end and how that can be designed so the people who are there delivering whatever service might be implemented. And even more broader than that, the systems thinking approach, which considers how many pieces in a complex system connect and what the feedbacks might be between them. And this is difficult thinking to engage in, and it's often really challenging when a client or someone comes to us with a predetermined idea of what the problem might be. It's our responsibility to sort of broaden that context for them and help them show how there is actually tremendous opportunity to not only be more considerate, but actually design something that can actualize our best intentions. And so involving the community and thinking of them as part of the learning and part of pedagogy is key to that as well. Our fourth principle is to design with students, not for students. So back to our question, what is the user experience of schools? In order to answer that, we really believe we need to go to the source. So as much as we want to work with educators and teachers and policymakers and other people involved in education, we think it's key to involve students in that process. And it also follows this ongoing trend of young people having more empowerment and autonomy in their education. Why not allow them to also design their own school experience? So one of the engagements we want to partake in the coming months is to co-design with a group of students. And so co-design is not just doing research, it's not just talking to people and learning, but we're getting people you're engaging with, the cohort of people, in this case students, to make and to prototype and to test with you so that we can deeply understand what their needs are, but also how they want to see a solution come to life. And you don't have to be an expert of anything other than your own experience in co-design. And it's our job as designers and facilitators to be able to make sense of that and help them through that process. So we are really keen to run a co-design session or sessions throughout the course of a week or number of weeks within a school that we'd love to partner with. So having a group of engaged young people who work with us over a period of time to both surface some of the issues that they're experiencing and then to prototype and test solutions with them that we can then share more broadly with the education community. We had some experience doing this with a client fairly recently in Tonga, actually, in the Pacific, where we worked with a group of young people, young women, around the issue of cyberbullying and cyber safety. And one of our design strategists, Bonnie, spent a couple of weeks in Tonga working with people to do exactly this, which is to sit with them and through creative activities and tools, get them to sort of surface what is often quite difficult subject matter to talk about, but create a safe enough environment to do that, and then to empower them to actually be the people who are solving that problem for themselves and for the broader community. That was really exciting work, and we're really interested in doing more of that. So what we're also doing around this idea, this sort of theme of young people becoming empowered and having more autonomy is, for us, it's raised a few questions when looking at the current global state and seeing how this trend is really coming to life through people like Greta Thunberg, and seeing how she's being held up as an icon for this kind of empowerment of young people, which is like really exciting for us. And I think it all gives us warm feelings about what the future holds for our society. But at the same time, we're interested in understanding the diverse range of thoughts and feelings about that from young people. So that kind of leadership, what kind of model is that creating, and is it for everyone? Are there young people for whom that is actually challenging, or not the way they want to experience those formative years? Obviously, there's a huge need for it, which is why those leaders are emerging. But we kind of want to again bring that broader consideration to it, and not just take it as a given, but asking questions of young people to uncover both the social acceptability of that, but also their personal feelings around taking that kind of autonomy and leadership around their own education. Our hypothesis is that, I guess, everyone, it's great, all young people, whatever, we really need to put to the test. So we've got a survey that we're actually developing to go out to young people in the coming weeks. And our fifth principle is that we use technology to enable learning, not be the focus of learning. So this is a big one for us. We're a design and technology company. And one of our design principles, just our broader design principles, we have it portable, not necessarily connected to education, is to design for purposeful uses of technology. And this speaks a bit to this solution biased approach that we have, where even though technology is a really powerful tool to help us solve problems, it's also upon us to ensure that we're not shoehorning in some technology just because it's new or we think it solved problems before into a problem that we don't fully understand. So whenever we enter into any design challenge in any space, we seek to first make sure they're solving the right problem. So understanding the problem deeply, and we do that by talking to people and working with them, who are the people who are actually experiencing that problem. And nowhere is this more important than in schools. What we heard from many teachers is that technology alone doesn't transform pedagogy. Often the old structures are preserved, just now in a digital environment. So example of Chromebooks and iPads being distributed amongst students and a requirement for young people in schools now. And the promise of this transforming the way learning was going to happen hasn't actually eventuated in many cases. And instead of teachers telling the young people to turn to page 50 in your textbooks, they're now telling students to turn to page 50 in your PDF. So it's really like not much has changed about the paradigm. And I think a lot of the promise of new technology in education hasn't been realized. Not to say that that opportunity isn't still there, it's just that it's much harder than just plugging in a few devices. There's also a risk of over-reliance on technology. Any tech needs support and needs to be sustainable. It needs to have its long-term reliability considered, particularly in education and in schools where funding comes few and far between. When things don't work, we've heard from many educators that it's a huge problem. Teachers painted a picture of us of, imagine a classroom of 30 kids watching you try to connect your laptop to a digital whiteboard while they're sitting there trying to wait for what this whole, class is supposed to be about. And you can imagine the frustration that comes from that, and the tech guy being busy somewhere else, so he can't come to you right now. And so whilst there's this tremendous opportunity for connection and creativity with digital tools, we need to recognize that it's not a silver bullet for transformation. It is an enabler and it's a powerful tool, but it doesn't automatically shift the thinking and the approach of learning, which is what the promise of it is. And we'll touch on that a bit later when we talk about a particular project we're working on at the moment. So the same way we approach any user-centered design challenge, we should approach the implementation of tech in schools. We need to first understand the needs, motivations, the pains and the goals of students, teachers and parents before we start throwing technology at the problem. And our final design principle, we've actually got a question here. Have you received any pushback to the principles, or are they being generally welcomed? Around technology, I'm assuming that is?
Overall, we'll take it as overall.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Have we received any pushback from principals?
No, towards the principles. The principles we've put together, 6 principles.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking school principles, like
okay. Cap lower P.
So it's a really good question, actually. I think when we've shared these with people, they're generally very, people think like we're pretty spot on, and wouldn't this be great if this is the way people thought about making change in education. I think that's often the case though when you present any case for transformation. People are excited about it, and when you actually ask them to change things is when it becomes real.
Yeah.
And so we'll share a bit about some of the real world challenges we had with that, with one of our current projects we're working on, actually, where I think largely we were engaged with because we had this considered approach to things and this human-centered approach, and the reality of that, actually the work that it takes to do that, and it can be quite challenging for people because you have to face some hard truths when dealing with people, but I think it's upon us to ensure we're upholding that and aspiring to it.
I was going to say also, add for you, Baron, for your question there, that I think there's an element where you look at the questions and the principles. I think if you're a designer, they come quite naturally and obviously in the work that we do. But often it is kind of you do that moment when you are presenting it to educators themselves and they feel a sense of like, oh, this makes sense, like I'm being heard. It's a big part of that, I think, because when we go out and we're actually at the cold face with particularly teachers, you see the kind of effort and passion they have in the work that they're doing, and there is an element of what we've done, which is kind of, I guess, consolidated and validated some of those feelings and set a model that hopefully we're training as Joe will get into in a few minutes, we're training our team around these principles to use them in every setting and when we're thinking about how we do our work along with others. So, yeah.
But I think, yeah, it is challenging in practice because these are paradigm shifting in and of themselves in the way that people tend to think about improving a system or making change. But we feel confident putting this out there because we see enough of this work and we get enough of this work to give us the confidence that there is a readiness for this approach to things, even if it is a bit paradigm shifting for the old guard, I guess. So our sixth and final principle is to protect the creativity of teachers and students. So whenever you're transforming any system or any organization or any institution, you ask a lot of people. What you're asking is to change their behavior, because whatever solution gets implemented is going to require a whole lot of change from people. And so that change management aspect is always a huge consideration when you're doing any transformation. And because of this, it's often one of the hardest things to achieve. And it's often why transformation fails, because human nature is too difficult to change overnight. But when we're actually able to successfully shift behavior, an even bigger risk is presented. So teachers we spoke to, they spoke a lot about the role of creativity and its role in the contemporary classroom, and that learning thrives in a creative environment, which is an environment where there is the space and time to explore, there's flexibility to try new things, and a growth mindset where there's the freedom to fail. I guess the risk of actually implementing something that works is that, in the sense that it's taken up and it's adopted by people, by the institution, by the system, is that when that system doesn't account for that creativity, or when their solution doesn't account for that creativity or flexibility, or prohibits it, it can actually discourage and de-incentivize that innate creativity in people, and it can change that behavior in a negative way. Creativity is something that needs to be, I guess, protected, supported, and an environment needs to be there to allow it, because if the momentum of, organizational development and institutionalization gets its own way without, that intentional protection around things like creativity and flexibility, then it will be snuffed out, and it will find outlets elsewhere, but it may not be in the classroom. So our responsibility here is to design that flexibility, that customization into whatever solutions we implement, to make sure that what we're designing has enough room in there for whoever's using it to use it in their way. And we want to empower people with these new tools, processes, and structures to express and explore their creativity in new ways. So those are our 6 principles. We're going to talk a little bit about some practical application of that and what we experienced on one particular project. I'm mindful also that myself, I'm as a design director, I sort of oversee many projects at Portable, but I wasn't at the cold face of this particular project, so I'm going to be talking about it sort of one step removed, but I was very closely involved with the team working on it. But what we're planning on doing is having that team at a date soon to be announced to actually come and share more detail about this, practically what they've experienced, because it's actually a really exciting, interesting project. So the context is that we were working yet again in the Pacific, but this time a much larger project with a large education agency that runs a number of schools in Papua New Guinea. And so what they've asked us to do, what they've engaged us to do, is to scope and research and understand what digital transformation looks like for their schools. And their schools are in a number of different contexts in Papua New Guinea, ranging in sort of economic disparity. And I think the agency went with us largely because of our capability, but also because of our human-centered approach. And I think it really appealed to them, because I think they understood some of the risks of implementing technology without a lot of consideration. So For further context, PNG and a lot of the Pacific is getting a huge pipeline built of broadband at some point in the next year, and so they're preparing to, in a sense, catch up to where we're already at. And along with that, they're going to leapfrog a lot of the sort of development that we've had and time we've had to sort of grow into technology as the capability grew. They're kind of going to leapfrog a lot of that, and all of a sudden they're going to be in the 21st century with the same technology that we have. Essentially, I mean, it won't be as I think optimistic about how up to date it's going to be in terms of the speeds and that kind of thing. But regardless, I think an acknowledgement of that huge shift and what's to come. So what we experienced, we brought these principles into that project, and designers were aware of them, and so we were kind of prepared for, as we went to PNG and spoke to teachers and students and educators and people in the organisation. We were prepared for a lot of the same, I guess, concern that we heard from teachers in Australia around, oh, don't be a cowboy and come in and like throw some technology at us, because like things are working fine, or we're already doing good work here, or we don't want to stuff it up. We actually found the opposite. There was so much excitement, not just from our client, but from the people on the ground, the teachers and the students. They were really, really excited about what the opportunities that technology could bring, perhaps a little naively. And for us, it kind of turned our sense of responsibility up to 11, because not only were we now, actually practicing in the real world with with this approach, but we also had a cohort of people who were ready to welcome in whatever we threw at them. And so for us, it really became on us to not only hold ourselves to account, but also to bring that education to the cohort of people we worked with there, for them to understand that technology isn't a silver bullet, isn't going to solve all their problems, and it actually presents risks if done poorly. And so the way we've done that is through designing a number of tools and artifacts as part of what we're delivering for the project to help embed some of these principles within the educators and within the schools. So just for a couple of examples, we're developing a capability framework for teachers to bring, to understand what their current, and assess their current tech, literacy and capability to use tech within education, but with strong pedagogy focus. So we're drawing on a number of frameworks that are heavily researched in order to understand how tech and learning happens really well, and how to get the most out of it. We've also created like self-assessment tools for that as well. And we're also demonstrating through using as much human centeredness in the way we communicate some of the possibilities. So we're wanting to sort of show what's possible in the coming years as what does the classroom look like in 5 years' time. We're doing two things. One is which we're demonstrating that through showing the experience of students and teachers, so telling stories and using sort of imaginary case studies based on our research of what that experience actually looks like for a student or a teacher. And we're not painting a binary picture or a picture of the future that is like, this is the way it's definitely going to be. We're creating spectrums which are dependent on a number of factors, both the tech capabilities, but also the abilities of teachers and students to adopt that and use that. So that's some of the work that's happening at the moment, and we're keen to share more of that when we're able to. And so we'll look out for that in the coming weeks and months. So that wraps it up, I guess, for the sharing around the principles and some of that application. We've got some time now for some questions. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that, Andrew.
We've got the first question here, sort of popped up, which is, what are some strategies to empower students to give the feedback needed to contribute meaningfully?
Yeah. So I think there's a number of strategies. When we do co-design, we first, you can't, co-design is sometimes done poorly, where it's just kind of paid lip service to, and it's basically just consulting with people, but not actually giving them much power over what the solution might be. And so I think it's important to understand what you're getting into and make promises that you can actually follow through on when it comes to empowering those young people. and not just put it as a way to engage, but actually to create change. And so strategies, I mean, practically like on the ground, what it looks like is we run workshops and sessions that go for a number of hours, and they involve a lot of storytelling, a lot of sharing, a lot of connecting with people, and allowing people to surface and bring their understanding of what the problems are to the table before we start jumping to solutions. I mean, we can talk in more detail a bit, I guess, about the environmental factors and how to make that a safe and encouraging environment for young people. We actually have a report we're developing called Working with Young People. It's a bit of a guide around how to work with young people. We do a lot of work in mental health, and so we've run a number of co-design engagements around the country with young people of all sorts of backgrounds and contexts. Let me see, summarize. I think it would be really about giving as much transparency as to why you're doing what you're doing and what you actually intend to do with what you're learning from young people, and really trusting them to share and to contribute what is most meaningful to them. There's all sorts of considerations around facilitation and how that works, but I won't go into that.
Well, I think just to build on that, I think there's a point we hear a lot as well, and through observation is actually to get the students in the first place and to get their voices, and that often is really overlooked in when you're pushing on a change process or facilitating a change process. It'll often be restricted towards the executive within the school or a group of teachers. We don't see that sort of that pushing down further into student cells. So sure that I wouldn't try and, if I was a school trying to do this for the first time and giving advice, I think first step would be trying to make sure they're included in the process in a safe way, provide that example, and have a much longer process rather than a big attempt to run an entire co-design session with 20 students all at once and expect everyone to have a great outcome. Limit it down in scope. So
I think some of the concerns around co-design that we hear sometimes is that people are just going to get a shopping list of things that they then feel beholden to implement. And I think that's what happens when co-design is done somewhat superficially, where you're just kind of asking people, well, tell us what you want me to do, as opposed to actually having those people who are their design, the cohort of people you're working with, empowered to be part of the solution themselves, which is a different approach, and it means handing over some power, and that's difficult, but it actually requires true collaboration, which is the co-design, as opposed to just consultation and tell us what you want and we'll make it happen. I think, teachers are really well placed to be doing some of that work. I would imagine have a lot of them with young and understanding how they work.
There's a question here, maybe as a follow-up. You said that teachers need to be considered in the process of designing for schools, but can teachers themselves use these principles to create change? Will they have an advantage, disadvantage in doing so? You are working on any other research projects at the moment? Oh, that's a second question to that. Yeah,
I think I would like to hope so, and I would encourage teachers to, but they're obviously facing much greater demands and the systemic pressure on them than outsiders coming in who have the license to kind of experiment and dream and do things a bit differently. It's that classic consultant-like dilemma of the people in the organisation often best placed and know what they need in order to make a change, but it's often the consultants who get the power and the trust to come in and do that work. I think that co-design approach, so finding partners and agencies to work with who are able to embed within an organisation or within a school and work with teachers to do that is great. However, I think taking this approach, and if you're a teacher and you're on the ground and you want to be making change in whatever ways you can, I would encourage it. I just think it's going to be much more of an uphill battle, so I don't want to be under any illusions that it's going to be easy.
Well, it's possible. One of the reflections we had, as well as part of the research, was that schools were the units of change within, or the unit of transformation within education, not the system themselves, and that's very much viewed strongly by the teaching cohort and even people that are working within the department. or the various departments around Australia. So in that light, then you would say that teachers are close enough to the proximity to make changes that will affect people in their environment within the organisation. And there's other work we've done. The Hacking the Bureaucracy report kind of talks a little bit this about how a teacher can do, or any individual, move and navigate through an organisation to make change. And I think that skill needs to be kind of I think often a necessary skill to have when embarking on a change project at that level. So equipping yourself with all the elements of the toolkit, certainly one of these, having these principles are very useful, but obviously just adding and building to a toolkit as an educator would be is really important as you go.
I've got a friend who's a teacher who did her Masters of Education, and she's a fantastic human, and her first job was in a school in a sort of lower social economic area, and she was really confronted with how difficult it was to apply some of these like great practices and pedagogy that she learned at university in the context that she was in. However, I've seen over the course of a couple of years, whenever I meet her, I'm just like almost brought to tears by the story she tells me about what she's able to, like, how she engages with the young people in her class, and how she's actually helping that spread out to other teachers and people within that school who maybe don't have the same training, by demonstrating and building on the successes of the young people and sort of using that as a case study to grow. And it's not easy. She's like, it's her life. It kind of takes over a lot of her energy. But it's really inspiring, because that's where the road meets the road, and I think teachers are most empowered to be actually making that change.
So we've got another question here. A recurring barrier to fostering innovation is the perception that there isn't any appetite, funding, resources to develop and implement them. Have you found any examples of education or organisations overcoming this? Well, I think to answer that question, it's everywhere. And it's not, we haven't sort of stated this in this report, but we've had a lot of people, like we had a very broad cross section of people and met a lot of them. Our belief is that the best innovation happens as far away from the sun as possible, or from central, and so schools are very much a great example of that. And you can find pockets of people, and we also say you don't need funding to do it, to drive change. Usually, funding is the antithesis of innovation. In a lot of cases, it creates a whole bunch of, instantly blows up a small incremental approach to ideas, and puts a lot of pressure and scrutiny on it. Obviously, the money is nice once you got an idea off the ground. But yeah, we've definitely seen sort of like lots of examples, even like our early days as an organisation. Like we worked, me, the other co-founder, worked with essentially like the genesis of Portable came out of a school in Victoria, working with a couple of teachers there who are rebel raisers and innovators who were trying to drive and get up a community radio station, and we were part of that process. And that was incubated within a classroom with an English teacher and a math teacher. We've had no technical skills, and so it's definitely, I think, that again, it's about creating that right setting, being far away enough from the sun to do it. So
there's a question here that was sent in before the webinar, which is, are the 6 principles ranked in order of importance? And is there any principle that stands out to you as being most important? I wouldn't say they rank in order of importance, but there's definitely a story that's told throughout them, which is, I mean, I don't even know if I could articulate that right now. I don't want to spend too long philosophizing about it. But no, they're not really ranked in order of importance. I think they're all kind of facets of the same thing, which is that don't be a cowboy when you're going in and trying to make change. Consider who you're designing for and what kind of problems you're solving, and the more you can get a sense of what the bigger context is, the more likely your solution is actually likely to be not only useful and desirable, but actually implemented well and like take hold. And is there one that stands out as being more important than the others? I really like the first one, which is be intent on growing, not disrupting. I just like the idea of growing what's already there. And I think it's humbling, and this whole sort of process was really humbling for us, I think. The idea that we're not going to maybe come up with the most innovative solution. It might actually already be somewhere, and we're just going to go in and help that thing grow. But it's also, I don't know, it's kind of heartwarming and cool as well. So yeah, I like that one. Do you have a favorite one, Andrew?
No, they're all my children. I feel, you know. And you know, this is very much sort of the first phase of our research. Like, you know, we've released a report with all our other reports. They're progressing and continuing on, and now I guess we're trying to find touch points to actually to implement them, and that really is I guess you know, that will order and prioritize them as we see them in actual practical sense with the projects that we're currently working on going forward. So I'm conscious we've got 4 minutes left, so and we won't burn through them. We'll burn them really quickly. I want to thank everyone today for your time. We know, you know, it's difficult to find the time of day to actually go out and do these things and sit in front of a computer and watch a couple of people talk. But we really appreciate the time that you spent to gather insights. If you've got questions or you want to connect with us afterwards, we're more than happy to reach out, and we'll let you know about upcoming events. I just want to also take the time to thank the other researchers on the project. Kate Fail did an excellent job in kicking this off at the start. We've got Luke as well from our team, who's a big part in driving it. Anita.
I wasn't going to start naming people because I knew I'd forget.
We're going to forget some, but I think it's important that you know, we do have a group of people in the which is sort of our educational team that are actively working these projects. So just want to also say this is being recorded to be sent out as well. So we will send out. If you feel like there's a colleague that you want to share it with, then reach out. We can share the video, but it'll be up on the portable website soon.
Cool.
Thanks again.
Thanks everyone.
And yeah, look forward to seeing you at our next event or next webinar.
Take care.